He stood in the doorway of his own bank, staring down at the young woman kneeling before him, frantically trying to scrub the dirt off his expensive leather shoes. The scene was harsh and humiliating, but this was exactly how the banker wanted it, to display his power, to make it clear to everyone that he, Edward Litvinov, was used to controlling people and their fates. His voice was cold and commanding. "Do it properly, Annie," he sneered. "If you're planning to marry my son, you'd better learn to follow your future father-in-law's requests." The young woman, Annie, kept her eyes down. She knew that if she looked at Edward Litvinov for even a second, she wouldn't be able to hide her tears or her rage. For her, this wasn't just humiliation in front of the bank's employees and random visitors. It was an unbearable blow to her pride. But she had no choice. Her fiancé, Arthur, stood nearby, pale and visibly shaken, trembling with his own powerlessness to stand up to his father. It was for her love for Arthur that Annie endured this. She bit her lip to keep from snapping back. "Dad," Arthur started, stepping closer. "Maybe that's enough." "Shame on you." Edward Litvinov cut him off, his gaze dripping with paternal disdain. "You're the one to talk about shame? Marrying a girl without a penny to her name? If you were a real man, you wouldn't let your fiancée toil away in some cheap diner. Who's stopping her from getting a decent job? She's chosen to be a nobody, so now she has to prove she's worthy of your hand." He nudged her slightly with his foot to get her attention. "Annie, try harder. I want these shoes to shine." Edward's loud words drew curious glances from the people in the bank's lobby. Some whispered to colleagues. Others raised their eyebrows in surprise. Most understood that this wasn't just about dirty shoes or Annie's supposed lack of manners. They knew Edward Litvinov's character all too well. He thrived on control, and asserting his dominance was paramount. Few, however, could fathom why a girl from a modest background, with strikingly sincere eyes, would agree to such a public spectacle. Annie finished cleaning one shoe and moved to the other. Inside, she felt a storm brewing, a mix of rage and wounded pride. She didn't look like someone who would simply accept humiliation. "I have to be strong," she thought. "I can't show weakness now, but I won't let myself be trampled in the future." At that moment, she lifted her head and met Arthur's gaze. He looked as if he were suffering just as much as she was, his eyes pleading, "I'm sorry I can't protect you right now." Annie understood. She was ready to fight for her happiness, but she was done dancing to this cruel man's tune. "Enough," Annie said, standing up. Her words were quiet but firm. "What do you mean, enough?" Edward snapped, glaring at her. Annie met his gaze. Instead of running off in tears, as everyone expected, she handed him the brush. "Finish it yourself, Mr. Litvinov. I don't owe you anything anymore. In fact, you're fired." She spoke the last sentence with such cold confidence that the lobby fell silent. Bank employees, security guards, and even random clients froze in shock. Fired? How could a former waitress from a roadside diner fire the owner of a bank? Annie didn't look at the onlookers. She seemed to be addressing Edward alone, her tone carrying a steely resolve no one expected. "What?" was all the banker could muster, blinking as if trying to ensure he hadn't misheard. The silence grew thick like molasses. The whispers that had filled the room moments ago stopped. Arthur stepped closer, instinctively taking Annie's hand, stunned by her words. "Annie, what do you mean?" he murmured. Annie stood her ground, her eyes locked on the man who was used to keeping everyone in fear and submission. Everyone in the lobby felt it. A new chapter was beginning, especially for Edward Litvinov, the once all-powerful banker who thought he was untouchable. This was the start of an open conflict, rooted in the personal struggles of each character. To understand how Annie found the courage to stand up to him and how she could claim the right to say, "You're fired," We need to go back to the events that brought this young couple to the brink of collapse and led Edward Litvinov to publicly humiliate Annie, setting the stage for what seemed to be the downfall of his impeccable reputation. Annie and Arthur met by chance at a small diner on the outskirts of the city. Annie worked there as a waitress, living modestly in a rented room in an old building. Her parents had passed away years ago, and she'd been fending for herself ever since, dreaming of becoming successful, not necessarily wealthy, but secure enough to not count every penny and live with confidence in tomorrow. Arthur, on the other hand, was the son of a prominent banker in the city. Unlike his father, he didn't flaunt his family's wealth or status, though everyone knew his father ran one of the city's largest banks. Arthur was studying to become a lawyer, but had no intention of taking a cushy job in his father's empire. He wanted to forge his own path, driven by his own values and ideas, which often clashed with his father's expectations. For Edward Litvinov, this was a sore point. He wanted his son to follow in his footsteps, to become the same ruthless, cynical businessman he was. Tensions between father and son had been simmering for years. One day, Arthur was at the diner, drowning his frustrations in coffee and talking quietly on the phone with a friend. Annie approached his table with her usual warm smile and asked if he wanted anything else. There was kindness in her voice and eyes, and though he'd only ordered a cappuccino, he was still hungry. When he ordered a sandwich, a brief conversation sparked between them. On a whim, Arthur invited her to sit at his table while the diner was quiet. He just wanted to talk to someone unconnected to his father's money or their constant family conflicts. Annie hesitated, glancing around to see if it would anger her manager, but the diner was calm, so she sat across from him, keeping a polite distance. "Doesn't it seem odd to chat with a waitress?" she asked with a smile. "This doesn't happen every day." "Maybe it's odd," Arthur replied, "but today I don't care what anyone thinks. Do you often talk to customers, or only the really sad ones?" She laughed. "You look like you could use some company." Arthur studied her. He was usually wary of people, suspecting many wanted to befriend him only because of his father's wealth. But Annie's sincerity shone through. Her modest clothes and demeanor made it clear she wasn't after his money. For the first time in a while, he felt a sense of trust. That's how their connection began. Arthur started visiting the diner more often, accidentally timing his visits to see Annie. She greeted him with the same gentle smile, and he didn't hide that he was happy to see her. One evening, as her shift ended, he offered to drive her home. Annie hesitated. She didn't have a car or enough money for a cab, and riding with a near stranger felt risky. But she saw no malice in Arthur's eyes, only kindness, and she was exhausted. She agreed, and that evening ride marked the start of their genuine friendship, which soon blossomed into mutual affection and, eventually, love. They spent time together, driving around, walking in parks, and talking about books and movies. The more Annie got to know Arthur, the more she realized he was nothing like his father. He appreciated the beauty of simple things and valued honest relationships. He often asked about her life, her dreams, and her plans, offering advice. She shared her struggles, how hard it was to afford rent, how her lack of formal education limited her job prospects. But Annie never asked for money or took advantage of Arthur's generosity. He offered to pay for additional schooling, but she firmly refused, determined to achieve everything on her own. Arthur admired her pride and strength of spirit. At the same time, he grew increasingly frustrated with his father, who repeatedly told him he was associating with the wrong people. When Edward learned Arthur was dating a girl from a poor family, he flew into a rage. It wasn't just fatherly concern. It was the protest of a man who only valued connections with the elite. He dreamed of Arthur marrying the daughter of a business partner, forging a powerful alliance. A modest waitress with no connections or money was, in Edward's eyes, an unworthy match for his heir. He did everything to break them apart. When Arthur dared to defend Annie, Edward threatened to cut him off financially, kick him out of the house, and leave him begging for mercy. For the banker, it was a matter of principle. No one defied him. Arthur was intimidated, accustomed to a certain stability, but his love for Annie only grew stronger, as did his resolve to prove he could survive without his father's wealth. Soon, the conflict escalated. Arthur stopped accepting his father's money, moved into a small leased apartment, and started looking for work to support himself. This was a blow to Edward's pride. He hoped Arthur would back down and return, but Arthur took a job as a junior lawyer at a small firm focused on social projects and protecting the rights of the underprivileged. This infuriated Edward even more, as the firm often opposed large monopolies and shady financial schemes, including those tied to his bank. Annie, seeing Arthur's efforts, felt both happy and guilty. She didn't want to be the reason for the rift between father and son, but their love was stronger. They decided to get married quietly, without fanfare, just a simple ceremony with their closest friends as witnesses. Arthur hoped his father might soften at the last moment, but that didn't happen. Then, events took a dramatic turn. A prestigious position opened up as an executive assistant at a major corporate holding company in the city. Annie applied, went through several interviews, and, to her surprise, made it to the final round. She had no powerful connections or fancy degrees, but her optimism and ability to handle complex situations impressed the hiring committee. The holding company's owner, Greg Pronin, was a well-connected figure who sometimes clashed with Edward Litvinov. When rumors spread that the new assistant might take on significant responsibilities, coordinating high-stakes negotiations, Annie felt her life changing. She kept her new job a secret, though she told Arthur she'd landed a serious position. As her role in the holding company grew, involving her in internal projects, it could drastically shape her future. Annie knew that proving herself could lead to major success and financial independence, allowing her to support Arthur. Meanwhile, Arthur continued to prove himself, defending families facing eviction due to shady dealings by his father's bank. For the first time, father and son were on opposite sides of a battle, one defending, the other exploiting. The conflict spilled into the courtroom. Whispers circulated. Asterisk, can you believe it? The son's defending the poor, while the father's squeezing them dry. Asterisk for Edward, this was an insult. He believed Arthur should stay out of such matters and accept that if you don't pay, you lose your home. That's how life works. The dispute peaked when the bank pushed to evict a family with a sick child. Arthur fought tirelessly to halt the process, finding legal loopholes and violations, further enraging his father. Edward, using his connections, pressured the court, threatening to block Arthur's firm by targeting their licensing agreements. The air was thick with hostility. Just days before Arthur and Annie's wedding, they were on edge, feeling the weight of Edward's threats and manipulations. Annie worried that her ambitions, her prestigious new job, were fueling Edward's anger. He couldn't tolerate a nobody rising to prominence. He even tried to influence her employer, but the holding company valued Annie and refused to fire her over a banker's whim. The day before the bank incident, Annie was invited to a business meeting where Greg Pronin, the holding company's owner, was present. Pronin, a principled man with a history of rivalry with Edward, learned that Annie was Arthur's fiancée. Years ago, he and Edward had clashed over a joint investment, and Pronin had come out on top. Now, he saw potential in Annie and decided to protect her from Edward's attacks, though he preferred to act discreetly. Without sharing details with Annie, Pronin prepared documents naming her a special representative of the holding company, giving her authority to sign off on certain strategic decisions, including those affecting the holding's interactions with Edwards Bank. This seemingly minor formality would soon play a pivotal role. Unbeknownst to Annie, Pronine was planning to acquire a significant share of Edwards Bank through intermediaries, aiming to negotiate as a co-owner. It was part ambition, part settling old scores. This set the stage for the dramatic confrontation. That fateful day started like any other for Annie. She woke early, did her morning workout, and headed to work. She needed to stop by Edwards Bank to finalize some paperwork related to a small project her holding company was coordinating with the bank's financial structure. She wanted to handle it quickly and return to the office for an important call with international partners. On her way, she spoke with Arthur, who mentioned that his father had summoned him for a serious talk and was already at the bank. Annie felt uneasy. She knew Edward's character and sensed the conversation would be tense. When she arrived, she was greeted by Edward's deputy, Stephen Grebnev, a middle-aged man who seemed nervous. He escorted her to a conference room, claiming they were preparing documents. But his tense expression told Annie something unpleasant was coming. As she approached the room, she saw Arthur arguing with security, and beside him stood Edward, his face like stone. They'd clearly already exchanged heated words. "Here's our little Annie," Edward said with a mockingly polite smile that felt more like a sneer. He stood in his tailored suit, tie perfectly pressed, as if waiting for the perfect moment to stage a public reckoning for those who dared defy him. For him, this was a performance to show what happened to those who crossed him. "Yes," Annie replied, trying to stay calm. "I was called to sign some documents. I assume you're aware." "Sign documents?" Edward raised an eyebrow. "I don't think we're ready for that." "And who are you, anyway?" "A waitress." He spat the word loudly, ensuring the employees in the lobby heard every biting syllable. Annie felt her face flush, her fists clenching as she fought to stay composed. "Dad, stop it." Arthur tried to intervene, but Edward strode forward, ushering Annie to a nearby chair and pointing to his shoe. "Since you're here, show us what your pathetic life has taught you." "Clean my shoes. Don't you dare refuse. Everyone can see what you're capable of." Annie wanted to protest, but the words caught in her throat. She saw the mocking glances, felt the crowd of employees and clients forming a semicircle around her. Shock paralyzed her for a moment. Arthur pleaded, "Dad, this is insane. Why are you doing this?" "Because she, and you, need to learn your place," Edward barked. "I told you I won't approve this marriage. If you keep defying me, you'll regret it." His words were a clear threat. Annie knew this wasn't empty bravado, but she also knew she had support and a way to protect herself. Fear mixed with indignation. She overheard a security guard whisper to another, "I wish she'd just run away before he makes her do it." Running would have been easy, but everything inside her screamed that she couldn't back down. If she retreated now, she'd be remembered as weak. Arthur's pained, regretful eyes gave her strength. She wanted to prove to everyone that she wasn't just a humiliated girl. She could endure this and keep her dignity. Sometimes you have to push through external shame to take a decisive step toward victory. "Fine," Annie said, kneeling. "If you want a public humiliation, I'll give you one. But don't forget, Mr. Litvinov, humiliating others might just humiliate you." She took a brush handed to her by an employee and began cleaning his shoes. Edward looked down with a scornful smirk. The room froze, as if time had stopped. No one intervened, too afraid of his influence. For Annie, it was an agonizing moment. Memories of her life flashed through her mind. Poverty, losing her parents, scraping by, enduring degrading treatment from bosses. Now, this was the culmination. Yet, strangely, she felt a sense of liberation. Asterisk if I'm already at rock bottom. I have nothing to lose. It's time to show my strength, Asterisk. She finished one shoe and moved to the other, fighting back tears but refusing to let them fall. Arthur kept muttering, "Annie, you don't have to do this," but she silenced him with a glance. In that moment, she made her decision. When she finished, she stood, handed Edward the brush, and said, "You can finish yourself if you're not satisfied. But you've seen my work. Now it's your turn to see something else. You're fired." She said it firmly, her voice ringing through the silent lobby. Edward's face flushed. "What kind of joke is this?" he demanded. "I know exactly what I'm saying," Annie replied calmly. "I'm an authorized representative of Pronine and Partners, which has acquired enough shares in your bank to hold a decisive vote on the board. The documents are signed, and today the board was set to approve new management changes. I'm authorized to participate in that meeting, and my signature carries weight. I came here for one document, but you decided to put on a show. Now, by the board decision, you're out." The room gasped. "How dare you?" Edward shouted, but his voice betrayed confusion. "This is a fraud. Impossible. Who are you?" "I was a waitress once," Annie said. "But I'm also your future daughter-in-law, whether you like it or not. And by Mr. Pronine's authority, I have the right to make key personnel decisions for the holding and its affiliates, including your bank." She pulled an envelope from her bag. "Take a look. It's all there. Your stake is now a minority, and the rest has gone to shareholders tied to the holding. You no longer have a majority." The weight of her words hit Edward like a sledgehammer. He stood speechless, realizing that without the board's approval, his power in the bank was gone. He'd relied on his controlling stake to dictate terms, but Pronine had quietly bought up shares through proxies, and Pronine had chosen Annie to deliver the verdict. The lobby, which had just witnessed Annie's humiliation, now watched Edward squirm. Guards, secretaries, and consultants were stunned. A revolution in the bank's leadership had unfolded before their eyes. "You have no right," Edward choked out, shaking. "I'll sue." "Go ahead," Annie replied coolly. "But we have a solid legal foundation. Your son, by the way, is a talented lawyer. Let him take a look. I've just carried out the board's decision and informed you." She turned to Arthur, who was as shocked as everyone else, but looked at her with growing respect and hope. He realized the power dynamic had shifted. If his father was out, the tyranny might end. But he also worried about the blow to his family. "Annie," he whispered, "how did you know all this?" "My boss didn't tell me everything up front," she admitted. "They hinted at a possible power shift in the bank, and that I'd have to deliver the verdict. Mr. Pronine wants to talk to you personally. He hopes to work with both you and your father, but not in the way Edward's used to, through coercion and control." Their conversation was almost a whisper as the crowd watched Edward, who was studying the documents Annie had handed him. His reddened face showed he knew they were legally sound. His deputy, Stephen Grebnev, cautiously took the papers, scanned them, and looked at his former boss with surprise, and perhaps a hint of satisfaction. Many of Edward's subordinates had long suffered under his pressure and hoped for change. "It's true," Stephen said. "The shares have been transferred to a group affiliated with Pronine and Partners. The board has appointed Mr. Koval as interim chairman, and Ms. Annie Kravitz as a special advisor with authority over certain external contracts and agreements." "So I have no authority?" Edward rasped, his hands trembling. "Not until the board finalizes your status as a shareholder," Stephen replied. "They'll meet today to formalize it." A heavy silence fell. Annie watched as Edward struggled to maintain composure, clearly tempted to tear up the papers, but knowing it would change nothing. Copies were already with the board, and the takeover had been meticulously planned. "Everyone back to work," Edward barked, glaring at the employees. "Security, I don't want to see this girl in my bank by tonight." The guards exchanged glances, unsure what to do. According to the documents, Annie was now practically their superior. One guard, summoning courage, said, "Sorry, Mr. Litvinov, but we can't use force without the board's approval, given the latest news." "Cowards!" Edward roared, throwing the folder to the floor. Arthur watched his father deflate, as if the air had been sucked out of him. Annie, however, felt steadier. She picked up the folder and said, "Thank you, Stephen, for clarifying. Arthur and I are leaving. I'm not here to make a scene. The board will make its final decision, and I'm just delivering the outcome." She turned to Edward. "If you want a dialogue, it can happen when you're ready to talk business without bullying. I'm not a monster, and I'm not out to destroy you personally. But your behavior can't go unpunished. You declared war on your own son and his fiancée. Now the tables have turned." With that, Annie headed for the exit. Arthur, glancing at his father one last time, said, "Dad, I didn't want it to come to this. But you'll have to realize your power isn't absolute. Give us a chance to live our way." They left. The lobby emptied as employees scrambled to follow orders, some from Edward, others from the new shareholders. It was unclear who was in charge. Clients dispersed, whispering in astonishment. Edward stood alone in the lobby where he'd once been the undisputed king. Now, a shaken man who'd just been told he was out, he felt fear for the future for the first time. But for now, anger consumed him. In the car, Annie and Arthur sat in silence for a moment. "He won't give up," Annie said. "Not with his personality." "This isn't over," Arthur agreed, starting the engine. "But he's taken a serious hit." "Annie, could you have stopped this at any point? Did Pronin force you to go against my dad?" "No one forced me," she said. "They told me the bank might join Pronin and partners." I was shocked. Greg Pronin said he saw potential in me and wanted me to be the representative. I think he also wanted to teach your father a lesson for old grudges. If I'd refused to sign or announce it, he'd have found someone else, maybe someone harsher. This way, I could at least protect myself from humiliation and give your dad a chance to negotiate without losing everything. Arthur stared at the windshield. "I'm torn. He deserved this for humiliating you, but he's still my dad. I don't want him to break completely." Annie touched his shoulder. "I get it. He'll have to rethink his ways. I won't pretend I feel sorry for him after what he did, but I don't want endless revenge either. Maybe one day he'll see he can't manipulate people like he's used to." "I hope so," Arthur murmured. "Now," Annie glanced at her watch, "I need to get to the office. There's an important meeting, and I'm already late, but I might make it." They drove off, both weighed down by the day's events, but also relieved. Their relationship was now free from Edward's constant shadow. Conflicts would come, and consequences would need handling, but Annie had proven she wouldn't be treated like a servant. Arthur glanced at her, remembering their first meeting at the diner, how she never asked for gifts or money. He saw the immense inner strength in this woman who could reshape destinies and businesses. Silently, he thanked fate for bringing her into his life, despite the drama. At the office, colleagues buzzed with news of the bank's shakeup, eyeing Annie with curiosity and respect. Yesterday, she was a talented assistant. Today, she held real power. Some congratulated her, others nodded silently. Annie stayed humble, saying details would come from management, and she was just following orders. Inside, emotion swirled. Not long ago, she was an unremarkable girl from a poor family. Now, she was playing in high-stakes corporate games. Half an hour before a meeting, Pronin's assistant summoned Annie to his office. She smoothed her blouse and entered his spacious, sunlit office overlooking the city square. Pronin leaned back in his leather chair and smiled. "Hello, Anastasia. How'd it go with Litvinov?" "In short," Annie said, opting for honesty, "he made me clean his shoes and I told him he's fired. It was a scandal in front of the staff. He didn't know about the shares and took the hit hard." Pronin chuckled. "I'm not sorry for him, But he won't give up. He'll try to regain control. We need to stay sharp. I'm pleased you defended your honor and showed our resolve. It was tough, Annie admitted, but I couldn't let him crush me. I'd appreciate it if you took formal control now. I'm not sure I can handle his personal attacks. Of course, Prony nodded, but you remain the one signing key documents. Don't shy away from your role. If you want, we can set up training programs to help you grow in this direction. I see a strong manager in you. Since you're marrying Litvinov's son, your actions will carry even more weight. It might push him toward constructive dialogue. We'll sit down and negotiate once emotions settle. But today, we focus on other matters. Annie thanked Pronin for his support, feeling a mix of pride and doubt. Could she become more than a pawn in this corporate game? Did she want to keep fighting these battles? For now, she had little choice. She was already in deep. At the meeting, the share acquisition was announced. Department heads admired Pronin's bold move, though some worried about the city authorities' reaction, given Edward's influence. Pronin assured them everything was legally sound. Annie received signed directives confirming her status, adding to her workload as she coordinated contracts with the bank, now managed by Pronin's allies. This meant dealing with Edward's old staff, who were still figuring out whose orders to follow. Exhausted, Annie left the office at day's end. Arthur was waiting outside, his face tired but lighting up when he saw her. They embraced without words, understanding what they'd been through. "Let's just be together," he suggested. "Maybe drive somewhere quiet and have dinner." "Sounds perfect," Annie replied. "I'm on the verge of a breakdown." They went to a cozy cafe on the city's outskirts, near a park. Not the diner where Annie once worked, though that place held special memories. Over dinner, they tried to relax. Arthur spoke first. "Today, I realized our marriage isn't just about us. It's become this big event tied to business interests and rivalries. Does that scare you, being at the center of this storm?" "It does," Annie admitted. "But not long ago, I was terrified of staying a poor waitress with no prospects. Turns out, there are worse fears like going against your conscience. I'm glad we didn't bow to your father. He'd have broken us. Maybe we can change this ruthless business world for the better. Or at least try." Arthur smiled. "Honestly, I prefer a quiet life as a lawyer, helping people, not making headlines. But if you're not scared off, I'll be by your side, helping however I can." Annie was touched. "I love you, and I believe we'll get through this. We just need to stick together." A cool night breeze swept through the cafe as a customer opened the door. Annie shivered, reflecting on how fast her life had changed. Not long ago, I was carrying trays between tables like these. Now I'm signing major documents and deciding the fate of a bank. They discussed their wedding plans, a simple ceremony with close friends, a date to set at the courthouse. They need to talk to Arthur's mother, who lived in another city after divorcing Edward. She'd always been kinder than his father. Annie returned to her modest rented apartment that night, surrounded by the simple belongings of her past. Arthur offered to move in together, but she wanted to wait, not wanting to mix work, wedding, and domestic life all at once. Alone, she sorted through documents for work, staring out at the city lights. What a crazy day, she thought, closing her laptop. Anger from the bank humiliation lingered, but so did a sense of victory. She hadn't sought this war, but circumstances forced her to play by its rules. Maybe this will lead to something good. Maybe Edward will rethink his actions, and I'll climb the career ladder, helping others along the way. The next morning, her phone buzzed with calls from reporters sniffing out the bank's leadership change. She deflected them, saying, "Please contact the press office." "I have no comment." But it was clear gossip and provocations would follow her for a while. On her way to work, she got a text from Arthur. "I heard Dad's meeting with a lawyer. He's probably trying to challenge the board decision. Asterisk Annie sighed but smiled. She knew the takeover was legally airtight, crafted by experts. Edward could try, but he'd likely lose in court. The office was abuzz with new projects. Annie juggled her growing responsibilities, taking a break on the top-floor observation deck of the office building. Sitting in a comfortable chair, she gazed at the city, wondering if she could one day improve the lives of ordinary people. Her dream had always been to help those struggling, like she once did. She was proud of Arthur's work at his legal firm, fighting for the disadvantaged. Maybe we can build a system where people don't suffer for being born into the wrong family or without wealth, she thought. It sounds utopian, but why not try? Her thoughts were interrupted by footsteps. Stephen Grebnev, Edward's former deputy, now reporting to the new shareholders, approached. Anastasia, good to see you. I hope to catch you to discuss our next steps. Of course, Annie said, gesturing to a chair. Have a seat. He sat, sighing wearily. The bank's a mess. Employees are confused about Edward's departure and worried about their jobs. Are mass layoffs or major reshuffles planned? Annie shook her head. From what I know, no widespread layoffs are planned. The goal is to develop the bank, not destroy it. There might be some process optimization, but not a purge. That's reassuring, Stevens said. I can tell the staff there won't be mass firings. Yes, tell them things will stay reasonable. Just work honestly and follow the rules. If there were any shady schemes, those need to stop, or we'll have a different conversation. Understood. What about Edward? He's still a shareholder, even without control. Will he come around? Hard to say, Annie replied. He'll likely resist. If he wants a constructive role, we might find a place for him on the board, but without his old dictatorial ways. I don't have exact instructions, but Pronine is open to talks. Stephen nodded. I'll inform the team. Hopefully, we can avoid panic. He paused, then added, I'm sorry you had to go through that scene in the lobby. I was ashamed of what happened. I know you couldn't do anything, Annie said quietly. But are you still loyal to your old boss? Honestly, I'm loyal to the bank, not individuals. Edward did a lot for it, but his methods often cross lines. I'll work by the law and common sense. That's what I like to hear, Annie smiled. I'm sure we'll find common ground. They shook hands, and Stephen left. Annie realized change was already underway, with employees shifting their loyalties, as often happens when power changes hands. I just hope I don't become like Edward, she thought, returning to her office. A few days later, Annie and Arthur applied for their marriage license, choosing a date a month out. Not too soon, but not far off. Meanwhile, Edward managed to secure a court hearing to challenge the board's decision, but the court refused to issue a temporary injunction. He remained sidelined, at least for now. Rumors swirled that he was seeking support from influential officials, but either Pronine had outmaneuvered him or Edward's connections were weakening. One thing was clear. There was no returning to his former dominance. Edward didn't give up. He appeared at the bank, meeting with loyal employees and reportedly planning a new commercial venture, perhaps another bank or a partnership with old allies. Annie stayed vigilant, knowing he wouldn't easily forgive her public rebuke. One evening, as she was leaving the office, her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. She answered and heard a low voice. Hello, Annie. It's Edward Litvinov. Do you have a moment to talk? She froze but answered calmly. I'm listening. I'd like to invite you to meet tomorrow at noon at the Triumph restaurant. Don't worry, it's a public place. No spectacles, just a conversation, one-on-one, without Arthur or your colleagues. Annie hesitated. Meeting him alone after everything was daunting, but she figured a talk was inevitable. All right, she said. I'll be there. Excellent, he replied, almost cheerfully. See you then. She hung up, hands shaking. Asterisk, what's he planning? Is he trying to make peace? Asterisk, she barely slept that night. The next morning, she requested the afternoon off, citing personal matters. Pronine, sensing it involved Edward, didn't object but advised caution. The Triumph restaurant was an upscale spot downtown, known for its snooty waiters and impeccable cuisine. Annie walked in, and an administrator led her to a window table where Edward sat. Her heart sank at the sight of his back. Memories of the shoe-cleaning incident still raw. But he stood, nodded politely, and gestured for her to sit. "Thank you for coming," he said as the waiter left. "Care to order something?" "I'm not hungry," Annie replied. "Let's get to the point, if you don't mind." He smirked. "Practical. Fine, though they make excellent fish here." He paused, fingers tapping the table nervously despite his confident facade. "What do you think of my loss of power?" "Satisfied? It's not about personal satisfaction," Annie said. "I didn't aim to take your bank. It was the board's decision. You know how business works. Shareholders can change leadership." "You were Pronin's tool, right?" he said. "He's always wanted to outsmart me, and he succeeded. I'm left with nothing. But you got your share, didn't you?" He glanced at her designer bag. "Think you can stay on top in this Shark Tank?" "My gain is the chance to live with your son without being mocked, to build a career," Annie said. "I'm not hiding that. But I'm not for sale. If you think I'm just a pawn, you're wrong." "Fair enough," he said, sipping mineral water. "I have a proposal. Let's call a truce. I've realized you and Arthur will marry with or without my approval, and I don't want to lose my son completely. You want your marriage to have a chance at normal family ties, right?" "Yes," Annie admitted. "But that doesn't mean I'll dance to your tune." "No need," he said. "I'm ready to give you and Arthur freedom, but on one condition. Help me regain influence in the bank. Not control, I know that's gone, but a seat on the board, some decision-making power. In return, I won't interfere in your family life and might even partner with your holding company for mutual benefit." Annie gave a wry smile. "So you want me to betray Pronine and help you? Do you think I have that kind of power?" "You hold the key," he said cryptically. "You can sway the board. You're not just a nobody there. I know I'm short a few votes for risky projects. With a voice on the board, I can make things happen. Everyone wins." "I don't doubt you can make money," Annie said. "But you also think it's fine to squeeze the poor and humiliate people. I can't just trust you. I won't betray Pronine. He believed in me. We can discuss your return to the board, but not through backroom deals. Do it openly. Propose a plan. Work with the new shareholders." "So noble now," Edward said, displeased. "Fine, we'll see. You might change your mind. I'm Arthur's father. Do you want him to grow up without family support?" "Stop manipulating," Annie shot back. "He's grown. He doesn't need your money. And as for moral support, offer it without blackmail." They sat in silence, the restaurant's soft music playing in the background. Edward watched her, trying to gauge her resolve. Annie saw flashes of anger and desperation in his eyes. "All right," he said finally. "If you won't play my game, I'll find another way. But everything has a price. We'll see if you regret this. We'll sit down to negotiate eventually." He stood, looked down at her, and added, "Have a nice day." He walked out briskly. Annie sat, calming her racing heart. "He didn't threaten me outright, but he made it clear this isn't over." She sensed his desperation, a man stripped of his status, grasping at any chance to reclaim it. But she couldn't give in. If he wanted reconciliation, he'd have to play by the rules. The next week, the bank stabilized. The new chairman, Koval, audited accounts and credit lines, aligning with Pronin's transparency goals. Minor scandals surfaced, revealing shady accounting, but they were contained. Annie attended meetings, reviewed reports, and saw that most employees were ordinary people, not involved in Edward's schemes. A few loyal managers were nervous, facing the choice to adapt or leave. A month passed, and things seemed calmer, though tension lingered. Annie and Arthur prepared for their wedding. They spoke with Arthur's mother, who supported her son's choice and promised to attend. Arthur, still at his legal firm, won several cases, saving families from eviction. He felt validated as a professional, free from his father's influence over the courts. The bank's general shareholders' meeting was held, the first since Edward's ousting. It aimed to finalize the restructuring and elect a permanent board. Annie was invited to vote. The day before, Pronine called, saying he'd be away on personal matters but that everything was handled with his vote proxied. At the meeting, Edward appeared as a minority shareholder, accompanied by lawyers and representatives. Dressed in a sharp suit, Annie was already in the room. He greeted her curtly and avoided her gaze. The meeting was tense but orderly. Koval's report confirmed he was managing well as chairman, and his candidacy received strong support. Other board candidates passed smoothly. Edward objected to many points, but his minority vote carried little weight. At the end, he raised his hand. "I'd like to say a few words," he said. The chairman nodded, and Edward stood. "I may hold a minority stake now, but I'm not giving up. I'll defend my investments. Many clients and partners I've worked with for years will back me. I expect the new management to respect proven strategies and profitable clients. If you dismantle them, I'll fight every decision in court." He scanned the room, then addressed Annie directly. "Ms. Kravitz, I advise you not to let power go to your head. Your position can change as quickly as mine did." The room fell silent. Annie recognized the veiled threat, but responded diplomatically. "Thank you for the warning. We value the experience of partners, but schemes that break the law or harm clients will be reviewed. Otherwise, you're welcome at the negotiation table for open dialogue." "We'll see what you say when you're held accountable," Edward muttered, sitting down. The meeting ended, and Annie left, avoiding Edward. Her heart raced. She knew more conflicts loomed, but her position was legally secure. The wedding week arrived. Despite the stress, Annie and Arthur were excited. They planned a small outdoor ceremony at a country club, inviting only close friends and family. Arthur's mother flew in, and Pronine attended, joking, "I couldn't miss my star assistant's wedding." Gossip swirled about whether Edward would show up. The day before, Annie got a call from an unfamiliar number. A polite female voice said, "Hello, Anastasia. I'm Mr. Litvinov's assistant. He wants to confirm if his invitation to the ceremony still stands." Annie was surprised. They hadn't sent a formal invitation, knowing his stance, but Arthur had emailed him, saying he'd be welcome if he chose to come. "Yes, it's still valid," Annie replied. "If he wants to attend, we're fine with it." "Understood. Thank you," the voice said and hung up. Annie was nervous but focused on the wedding. She and a friend picked out a bouquet and accessories, while Arthur handled logistics like the catering. They hoped the day would be peaceful. The wedding day was warm and sunny, as if nature itself blessed them. Annie wore a simple, elegant white dress with a delicate bracelet. Arthur looked dashing in a classic suit, his tie matching her bouquet. The ceremony took place in a floral pavilion at the club. A close friend walked Annie down the aisle, and Arthur waited, their eyes meeting with boundless love. Guests applauded, including Pronine and Arthur's mother, who teared up with pride. Annie scanned the crowd for Edward, but didn't see him at first. As the officiant asked everyone to stand for the vows, Annie and Arthur spoke heartfelt promises to support and love each other. They exchanged rings, kissed, and rose petals rained down. Amid the cheers, Annie noticed a figure at the entrance. Edward, in a dark suit, hesitating. Arthur paled but nodded, acknowledging his father. Annie took his hand, and they approached Edward. The guests watched warily. "Congratulations," Edward said, his voice low, glancing at Arthur, then Annie. "If it's all right, I'll leave a gift and go. I don't want to intrude." His eyes flicked to Pronine nearby. Live happily, if you can. Thank you, Arthur said sincerely. I'm glad you came. Edward frowned, sighed, and took Annie's hand, placing an envelope in it. This is for your new home. I know you want to earn your own way, but let this be my contribution. Maybe one day you'll see I want what's best for you, even if I show it oddly. Annie saw a flicker of sadness in his eyes, perhaps regret, perhaps just mourning his lost control. Thank you, she said softly. We won't refuse if it's genuine. I appreciate the gesture. Edward nodded, turned, and left. Some guests exhaled in relief. Arthur watched him go, pain in his eyes. Dad, why did it have to be this way? He murmured. But Annie's hand on his shoulder reminded him their life was now theirs. The celebration continued with dancing, wine, and toasts. Pronin congratulated them, saying, "Come back to the office in a week. We've got big plans." Arthur's mother hugged them, proud of their resilience. Annie's friends marveled at her journey from waitress to influential figure. The day was a whirlwind of joy, though Annie felt a lingering unease. She knew life wasn't a fairy tale, and more challenges awaited, but for now, they danced and celebrated their love. Later, alone under the stars, Annie said, "We've been through so much, and I know more storms are coming. But looking into your eyes, I know we'll make it. You'll never let me lose heart, and I won't let you give up." Arthur held her close. "Just don't give me reason to doubt our love. That's all I need. Together, we'll conquer anything." They stood, embraced, as the night glowed with soft lights and the rustle of leaves. Those moments of happiness overshadowed the scandals. They were married, free from fear of judgment or Edward's dominance. The next morning, they prepared for a short honeymoon in a nearby city. But just before leaving, Annie got a call from a colleague. "Sorry to bother you, but Litvinov's filing complaints with a regulatory agency, claiming the board's actions were illegal. What do we do?" Annie sighed, smiled at Arthur, and said, "I'll handle it over the phone." She spent 10 minutes giving instructions, then hung up. "All set. I told them how to respond." "We'll manage." "I'm sure we will," Arthur said. "Now let's go relax." They loaded their bags and drove off. Annie caught herself smiling. She was now, in spirit, Arthur's wife, even if the paperwork wasn't updated yet. Edward, despite his efforts, could no longer shatter her sense of self. They talked about their dreams, Arthur expanding his firm to help more people, Annie working on holding company projects to improve the city. They envisioned a family, a home with a garden, and found strength in their shared harmony. Months later, Edward continued his fight to reclaim power, but his influence waned. Pronin's team kept control, and legal reviews confirmed the share deals were legitimate. Edward couldn't prove wrongdoing. Some of his old schemes were dismantled, and while some loyalists left to join his new venture, its success was uncertain. He grew reclusive, reportedly bitter, blaming Annie and Arthur. Yet some said he quietly looked at their wedding photos, sighing over what might have been. Annie thrived at the holding company, offered more responsibilities, but asking not to be overwhelmed. "I want to live, not just work," she told Pronin. "I have a family now." She proposed a social fund to support talented students from low-income families, drawing on her own experience. Pronin backed the idea, and they began planning. Through their struggles, Annie and Arthur stayed united, facing disputes and daily challenges hand in hand. The memory of Edward forcing Annie to clean his shoes faded, a distant reminder of how power and pride can blind someone. That moment had solidified Annie's resolve to stand up for herself, no matter the cost. "You're fired," she told the banker, and in that moment, the lobby witnessed a young woman from a humble background topple a powerful man. For some, it was a miracle. For others, a reminder of how quickly fortunes shift. For Annie, It was a symbol of her refusal to fear the powerful, her belief in her own strength, and her commitment to love and justice. Thus ended one story and began another, of love, mutual support, and a shared journey. Challenges lay ahead, but Annie and Arthur walked hand in hand, finding strength in each other. Money and power could never replace human connection and respect. But that was a new chapter in their shared destiny. Thank you for listening to the story until the end. Subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends and loved ones. It motivates us to keep working on new stories every day. Don't miss the next amazing story that's about to appear on your screen. We're very grateful to have you with us. See you soon.